The officer spelled my name wrong on the report. That's how I knew he never looked at my license. Marcus Ellison, 2 L's. He wrote it with one. A small thing, you might say. Except when a man's entire future hinges on the accuracy of a document, every letter matters, every word, every carefully constructed lie. I was 53 years old when they put me in handcuffs outside a Walgreens in Naperville, Illinois, suburb west of Chicago. Good schools, clean streets, the kind of place where people walk their dogs at 9 o'clock at night without clutching their phones, ready to dial emergency services. I had lived there for 11 years, owned a 3-bedroom house on Willowbrook Lane, paid my taxes early because I liked the way it felt. My wife Carol and I raised 2 sons there. One was finishing his residency at Northwestern. The other taught high school history in Des Moines. None of that mattered the night of September 14th. What mattered was that I was a black man standing next to a gray Honda Accord in a strip mall parking lot at 8:47 p.m., and somebody inside that Walgreens felt afraid. The police report, the one with my name misspelled, said I was acting erratically and appeared to be casing vehicles in the lot. It said I became combative when officers approached. It said I refused to comply with lawful commands, and that physical restraint was necessary to effect detention. Every single word of that was a lie. I know because I was there. I was the one face down on the asphalt with a knee grinding into my lower back, while my blood pressure medication rolled under somebody's tire. But here's the thing about lies written in official ink. They don't need your permission to become the truth. The 911 call came in at 8:41 p.m. A woman told the dispatcher there was a suspicious man in the parking lot. Black male, gray jacket, looking into car windows. I was wearing a blue jacket, navy blue, but close enough, I suppose, close enough for government work. What I was actually doing was waiting for my wife. Carol had gone inside to pick up her prescription, thyroid medication. She'd been taking it for 6 years. The pharmacy knew her by name. I didn't go in with her because my hip was acting up. Old injury from my years working construction before I got my contractor's license. Some days it was fine. That day it wasn't. So I leaned against our car and watched the sun finish setting behind the Panera Bread across the street. That's when the first cruiser pulled in. No lights, no siren. Just a white Crown Victoria sliding into the lot like a shark circling shallow water. It parked 3 spaces away from me. The engine stayed running. I didn't think much of it. Naperville's got police presence. That's part of what you pay for in property taxes. I nodded at the officer behind the wheel the way you nod at anybody, just being polite. He didn't nod back. The second cruiser came from the other direction. This one pulled in behind me, blocking our car. Now I felt something shift in my chest. That old familiar weight that every black man in America learns to carry before he learns to drive. The first officer stepped out. Young, maybe 30, hand already resting on his belt, not on his weapon but close enough. The universal body language of authority preparing for confrontation. "Sir, can you step away from the vehicle?" I did immediately, hands visible, movements slow. I've had this conversation before, not in Naperville but in other places, other decades. The script doesn't change. "Is there a problem, officer?" "We've received a report of someone matching your description, attempting to break into vehicles in this lot." I looked around. The lot was half empty. A minivan 2 rows over, a pickup truck near the entrance, an elderly couple loading groceries into a sedan, none of them being questioned, none of them surrounded. I'm waiting for my wife. She's inside the pharmacy. That's our car right there. "Do you have identification?" I reached for my wallet, slowly, telegraphing every movement. "I'm going to take out my wallet now. It's in my back left pocket." The second officer had joined us by then, older, heavier. The nameplate said Reinhardt. He positioned himself to my right, cutting off any path to the store entrance, as if I might run, as if a 53-year-old man with a bad hip was a flight risk. I handed over my license. Marcus Ellison. The address matched the registration in the glove box. The car was in my name. Everything was exactly as I said it would be. The young officer, his name was Petrovsky, I'd learned that later, studied my license like it was written in a foreign language. This your current address? Yes, sir, 11 years now. What are you doing in this area? I felt my jaw tighten. Careful, Marcus, careful. I live 7 minutes from here. My wife and I shop at this Walgreens. We have for years. But you weren't shopping. You were standing outside. My hips bothering me. I didn't want to walk around the store. I was waiting. Reinhardt circled behind me. I could feel him there, studying me from an angle I couldn't see. You got anything in your pockets I should know about? Weapons, needles, anything sharp? No, sir. Mind if I check? I minded. I minded deeply. I minded in a way that went back generations, back to a history neither of these officers had ever been required to learn. But I said, go ahead. Reinhardt patted me down while Petrovsky ran my license. The older officer took his time, thorough, invasive, his hands pressed into my pockets, my waistband, the seams of my jacket. What's this? He pulled out my prescription bottle, blood pressure medication, lisinopril, my name on the label, my doctor's name below it. Heart medication. You got a prescription for this? I stared at him. The bottle was the prescription. My name was right there. But I didn't say that. I didn't say anything. Because by then I could feel the situation tilting towards something I couldn't control. That's when Carol walked out. She saw the cruisers first. Then me, standing with my arms slightly raised, my jacket pulled back from Reinhardt's search. She dropped the pharmacy bag. White pills scattered across the pavement like tiny accusations. Marcus, what's happening? Ma'am, stay back. But Carol wasn't built for staying back. 31 years of marriage, and I'd never seen her stay back from anything. She came toward us, her voice rising. That's my husband. What are you doing? Ma'am, I need you to stop right there. She didn't stop, she kept coming. Petrovsky turned toward her, one hand extended, the other dropping to his belt. That's when I moved. Not toward them, toward Carol. I stepped sideways, putting myself between her and Petrovsky, trying to wave her back with my hands. The report would later call this an aggressive movement toward Officer Petrovsky. What happened next took 3 seconds, maybe 4. In court, they'd slow it down frame by frame. They'd analyze angles and distances and reaction times. But in that parking lot, it was just chaos and pain and the sudden cold shock of the ground against my face. Reinhardt grabbed my arm, twisted it behind me. I went down hard, my bad hip screaming, my cheeks scraping across asphalt still warm from the September sun. Someone's knee, I never knew whose, pressed into my spine. I heard Carol screaming. I heard the click of handcuffs. I heard someone saying, stop resisting, even though I wasn't moving, couldn't move, didn't dare move. They held me there for what felt like hours. It was probably 3 minutes, an eternity measured in shallow breaths and the copper taste of fear. A crowd had gathered. I couldn't see them, but I could hear their phones, recording, watching, doing nothing. When they finally pulled me up, my glasses were gone. Somewhere under a car, I'd find them later, one lens cracked. Carol was being held back by a third officer who'd arrived during the takedown. She was crying. I'd only seen her cry twice before in our marriage, once when her mother died, once when our oldest son was deployed. Now she was crying in a Walgreens parking lot, while her husband stood in handcuffs for the crime of waiting. They put me in the back of Petrovsky's cruiser. The seats were hard plastic, no cushion. My shoulders ached from my arms being locked behind me at that angle. Through the window, I watched them question Carol. She was pointing at our car, at the pharmacy, at her scattered pills. 22 minutes. That's how long I sat there before Petrovsky finally opened the door. "We're going to let you go with a warning." A warning for what? For waiting, for being married, for standing in a parking lot I'd stood in 100 times before. He unlocked the cuffs. My wrists were raw, red marks that would purple into bruises by morning. "You're free to go." I didn't say anything. I couldn't trust what would come out. Carol was already at my side, helping me stand, her hands shaking as she checked my face, my arms, the back of my head. Petrovsky handed me my license. "Try to be more aware of how you come across. People get nervous." People? Which people? The woman who called 911, the officers who'd decided guilt before they'd asked a single question, the bystanders who'd filmed but hadn't spoken. I took my license. I took Carol's hand. We got in our car and drove home in complete silence. The bruises faded. The scrapes healed. But something else had happened in that parking lot. Something that couldn't be treated with antibiotic cream and bandages. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the asphalt. Every time a car pulled up behind me at a stoplight, I checked my mirrors for cruiser lights. I stopped going to the Walgreens. Then I stopped going to the grocery store. Then I stopped going out at night entirely. Carol tried to help. She always does. She bought me books about mindfulness, about processing trauma, about radical acceptance of things beyond our control. I read them. I understood them. They didn't help. It was our son Michael who finally said the words I'd been avoiding. "Dad, you need to file a complaint." He'd come home for Thanksgiving, 3 months after the incident. He could see what it had done to me, the weight I'd lost, the way I flinched at sirens, the 1,000-yard stare I got sometimes when I forgot where I was. "It won't change anything." "It might. And even if it doesn't, you'll have a record, documentation, something official." Official, like the police report that said I'd been acting erratically, like the dispatch notes that described my blue jacket as gray, like Officer Petrovsky's incident summary, which I'd eventually obtained through a public records request, claiming I had tensed and prepared to flee before being safely restrained. I hadn't tensed. I hadn't prepared. I tried to protect my wife from an officer reaching for his belt, but that wasn't in the report. That would never be in any report. I filed the complaint in December. Internal Affairs, Naperville Police Department. A 4-page document detailing exactly what had happened, exactly what was said, and exactly how the official record had diverged from reality. The officer who took my complaint was professional, polite, distant. He asked if I had witnesses. I said my wife. He asked if I had video. I didn't. The bystanders who'd recorded hadn't come forward. Why would they? To them, I was just another encounter, just another black man pressed against pavement, just another evening in America. 3 months later, I received a letter, 1 page, 2 paragraphs. The investigation had found no evidence of policy violations. Officers Petrovsky and Reinhardt had acted within departmental guidelines. The case was closed. I sat in my kitchen and read that letter 4 times. Then I walked to the living room, where Carol was grading papers. She taught 5th grade at a school 3 blocks from our house, and I handed it to her without a word. She read it, folded it, set it down. "What do you want to do?" I didn't know. I'd spent decades building a life that looked like the American dream. House, family, business, respect in my community. I sat on the zoning board. I coached Little League until my knees gave out. I'd been named Naperville Small Business Owner of the Year in 2019. The plaque was still on my office wall. None of that had protected me in that parking lot. And none of it would protect me now. The lawyer's name was Patricia Okonkwo. She had an office in Chicago downtown, in one of those buildings where the elevators require key cards and the receptionist offers you water in glass bottles instead of plastic cups. I'd found her through Michael. She specialized in civil rights cases, police misconduct, excessive force, the cases nobody wanted to take because they were hard to win and harder to settle. She listened for an hour without interrupting. When I finished, she pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing. The good news is you have no criminal record. They didn't charge you with anything. No resisting arrest, no obstruction, no disorderly conduct. That tells me they knew, even in the moment, that they didn't have grounds. And the bad news? The bad news is, knew and will admit are two very different things. And without video, it's your word against theirs. She explained the options. I could file a federal civil rights lawsuit under Section 1983. I could claim Fourth Amendment violations, unreasonable search and seizure, and maybe 14th Amendment violations if we could establish a pattern of racial profiling. But I have to be honest with you, Mr. Ellison. These cases are uphill battles. Juries tend to believe police officers. They tend to assume if someone was detained, there must have been a reason. And the qualified immunity doctrine protects officers unless we can prove they violated clearly established constitutional rights. Wasn't what they did clearly wrong? She looked at me with the kind of sad patience that said she'd had this conversation 100 times before. Wrong and unconstitutional aren't always the same thing, not in court. I hired her anyway. What choice did I have? Accept the letter from Internal Affairs as the final word. Let the lie in that report become the official history of my life. No, some things are worth fighting for even when the odds are against you, especially then. The discovery process took 8 months. Patricia subpoenaed everything. The 911 call recording, the dispatch logs, the officer's body camera footage, their training records, their complaint histories. The 911 call was the first revelation. The woman, we never did learn her name, had described a black man in a gray jacket looking into car windows and trying door handles. I hadn't been near any other cars. I hadn't touched any door handles. I'd been leaning against my own vehicle, my own property, for 7 minutes before the first cruiser arrived. But here's what mattered. She hadn't even given them my location in the parking lot. She'd said, by the pharmacy entrance. I was parked in the overflow section, 50 feet away. The officers hadn't approached me because of the call. They'd approached me because they'd seen a black man standing alone and decided to connect the dots themselves. The body camera footage was worse. Petrovska's camera had been running. The audio was intermittent. Technical malfunction, according to the department, but the video was intact. It showed me standing calmly with my hands visible. It showed me handing over my license without hesitation. It showed me nodding, agreeing, cooperating. And it showed Reinhardt grabbing my arm from behind before I'd made any sudden movement, before I'd stepped toward Carol, before I'd done anything that could reasonably be called aggressive. The report had lied about the sequence. The video proved it. Patricia filed a motion to compel additional discovery. She wanted Petrovska's and Reinhardt's personnel files, their previous complaints, any other stops they'd made in which suspects were described as erratic or combative, but weren't ultimately charged. The city fought her. Of course they did. But the judge, a woman named Helen Marchetti who'd been on the bench for 22 years and didn't seem inclined to accept weak arguments, sided with us. 3 weeks later, we received a box of documents. I wasn't the first. In the previous 4 years, Officer Jason Petrovsky had been involved in 17 stops involving black or Latino drivers or pedestrians. 11 of those stops had resulted in no charges. 8 of the 11 had narrative reports that included the words combative, erratic, or failed to comply. 8 people, 8 lies. 8 times the official record had been shaped to justify what couldn't be justified. One of them was a woman named Denise Crawford, 48 years old, a registered nurse at Edward Hospital. She'd been pulled over for a broken tail light and ended up face down on the shoulder of I-88 while officers searched her car without consent. The report said she'd been verbally hostile and appeared intoxicated. She'd been on her way home from a 12-hour shift in the ICU. She'd had nothing to drink. She'd asked politely, according to her own account, why she was being searched. For that, she'd been detained for an hour, humiliated in front of passing traffic, eventually released without a ticket, without an apology, without acknowledgement that anything had gone wrong. She hadn't filed a lawsuit. She'd filed a complaint just like I had, and she'd received the same letter. No evidence of policy violations. Case closed. Patricia tracked her down. Denise agreed to testify. We found 4 others willing to do the same. 4 strangers whose only connection was a shared experience. Being black in the wrong place at the wrong time, in a suburb that prided itself on being welcoming to everyone. The trial was scheduled for March, then pushed to June, then September. The city's lawyers filed motion after motion to dismiss, to limit evidence, to exclude witnesses. Each time, Judge Marchetti heard their arguments and ruled against them. Not always, but often enough. Often enough that the city started to understand this wasn't going away. They offered to settle in August, $200,000, a confidentiality agreement, no admission of wrongdoing. I said no. Carol supported me, but I could see the worry in her eyes. $200,000 was more money than we'd spend in a decade. It could pay off the house, fund our retirement, buy us the RV she'd always talked about for road trips to see the grandchildren. But it would also buy my silence. And what was my silence worth, really, when weighed against the 8 other names in those files? Against Denise Crawford's humiliation on the side of the highway, against the next person who'd be stopped for standing while black, whose report would say whatever it needed to say to make the officers look right. I can't take the money, I told Patricia, not with that agreement attached. She nodded. Then we go to trial. You understand what that means. They'll put you on the stand. They'll try to make you look angry, unreasonable, like the kind of person who'd make up allegations for a payday. They'll question your memory, your motives, your marriage. They'll bring up anything they can find. What can they find? You tell me. So I did. I told her about the speeding ticket from 1994. The time I was arrested at a protest in college, charges dropped, but the arrest record still existed somewhere. The argument I'd had with a building inspector in 2016, loud enough that a neighbor had called about the shouting. She wrote it all down. None of this is disqualifying, but you should know they'll use it if they can. They'll paint a picture of a man with a chip on his shoulder, a man looking for racism around every corner, a man who provoked this encounter and now wants to profit from it. And what will you paint? Patricia smiled. It was the first time I'd seen her smile since we'd started this process. The truth, which is always more compelling than a picture if you tell it right. The trial lasted 9 days. The city brought in their best attorneys, 3 of them in suits that cost more than my first car. They called expert witnesses who testified about the split-second decisions officers must make. They showed statistics about crime in parking lots. They questioned my perception, my memory, my motives. They put Petrovsky on the stand. He was clean-shaven now, thinner than in the video. He spoke clearly and calmly about his sincere concern for community safety, about his regret that I had felt mistreated, about his confidence that he had followed procedure exactly as he'd been trained. Patricia cross-examined him for 3 hours. She walked him through the 911 call, the description that didn't match me, the location that didn't match where I was standing. She asked him why he'd approached me specifically, when the description could have fit any number of people in that parking lot. I used my judgment based on the totality of circumstances. And what circumstances led you to believe Mr. Ellison was the suspect? He was standing alone near a vehicle. He appeared to be watching the area. Watching the area, you mean he was looking around? In a way that seemed purposeful. Mr. Ellison has lived in Naperville for 11 years. He shops at that Walgreens regularly. Isn't it possible he was simply standing in a familiar parking lot, waiting for his wife? Anything's possible. But that possibility didn't occur to you. He paused just for a moment, just long enough. I had to prioritize safety. Whose safety, Officer Petrovsky? He didn't answer. Patricia played the body camera footage for the jury. She slowed it down, frame by frame, the way she'd warned me it would be analyzed. She showed the jury exactly when Reinhardt grabbed my arm, exactly where my hands were, exactly how my body was positioned. Does this look like a man preparing to flee, ladies and gentlemen? Does this look like aggressive movement toward a police officer? Or does this look like a husband trying to protect his wife from a situation he didn't understand and couldn't control? She called Denise Crawford to the stand. Denise cried when she described lying on the shoulder of the highway, cars rushing past, wondering if this was the moment she'd die, wondering what her children would be told about why their mother never came home from work. She called the others too, each with their own story, each with their own encounter with Petrovsky or Reinhardt or officers like them, each with their own report that said things that hadn't happened, in language designed to protect those who needed protection least. I took the stand on day 7. The city's lead attorney, a man named Reynolds with gray temples and an easy smile, asked me questions for 2 hours, about my record, about the college arrest, about whether I had a history of conflict with authority. I answered each one. Yes, I'd been arrested at a protest in 1989. I'd been protesting the lack of black faculty at my university. No charges were filed because there was nothing to charge. Yes, I'd had words with a building inspector. He tried to fail my project because of a code violation that didn't exist. The county sided with me. The project was approved. Yes, I received a speeding ticket 30 years ago. I'd paid it. I'd slowed down. Mr. Ellison, Reynolds said, leaning against the witness box like we were old friends, isn't it possible that your perception of this incident has been colored by your past experiences? That you saw racism where there was simply cautious policing? I thought about the question. I thought about all the ways to answer it. Mr. Reynolds, I said, I've spent my entire adult life building things. Houses, businesses, a family, a reputation. I've never been cautious about hard work. I've never been cautious about responsibility, but I've had to be cautious every single day about how I'm seen by people who don't know me, people who look at my face before they look at my actions, people who decide what I am before they ask who I am. I looked at the jury, 12 faces, 8 white, 3 black, 1 Latino, people I'd never met who'd never heard of me until this case brought us together. You ask if I saw racism where there was only cautious policing. I ask you, why are those the only 2 options? Why can't cautious policing be racism? Why can't an officer who uses judgment to stop a black man instead of a white one, based on the same vague description, be exhibiting exactly the bias he's been trained not to notice? I didn't imagine what happened to me, Mr. Reynolds. I have the bruises. I have the hospital records from the panic attack I had 2 weeks later. I have the prescription for the anxiety medication I now take every night. I have the video that shows your clients lying in their report. Reynolds opened his mouth to object. Judge Marchetti waved him off. Mr. Ellison, you may continue. I nodded. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. I'm not here for money. The city offered me money. I turned it down because money can't buy back my sense of safety. It can't undo the moment my wife watched me lying face down on pavement we've walked across together 100 times. It can't restore my trust in the officers I used to nod at when they drove past my house. I paused, let the silence do its work. I'm here because if I don't speak, the next person won't either. and the person after that. And eventually, there won't be anyone left who believes speaking matters. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you'll side with the officers and I'll go home having lost everything. But at least the words will be on the record. At least someone will know that Marcus Ellison, spelled with 2 L's, stood in a courtroom and told the truth. The jury deliberated for 14 hours. I spent that time in a small room with Carol and Michael. Our other son, James, couldn't get away from his residency, but he called every 2 hours, asking for updates we didn't have. Patricia came in and out trying to read signals that weren't there. She'd seen juries deliberate longer. She'd seen them return faster. There was no formula, no reliable prediction, just waiting. Carol held my hand. Neither of us spoke much. What was there to say? We'd said everything already. We'd been saying it for years in different ways in different rooms, to each other, to our sons, to a world that sometimes listened and mostly didn't. The jury returned at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday. I remember the exact time because I'd been watching the clock on the wall, counting the minutes until they called us back in, counting the seconds until I'd know whether any of it had mattered. The foreperson was a woman named Janet something. I never caught her last name. She stood when Judge Marchetti asked if the jury had reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor." They found in my favor on 3 of 4 counts: Fourth Amendment violation, excessive force, negligent supervision by the department. They awarded damages totaling $1.4 million. I heard Carol's sharp intake of breath beside me. I heard Patricia exhale. I heard Reynolds asking to poll the jury, his voice flat with disbelief. I didn't hear anything after that. Not really. I was somewhere else. Somewhere back in that parking lot, watching the sun set behind the Panera Bread, waiting for my wife, thinking about nothing because nothing was wrong. The city appealed, of course. These things always get appealed. But 6 months later the appellate court affirmed. Every finding, every dollar, the case was over. I thought about the money, what we'd do with it, what it meant. And I realized, sitting in our kitchen on the morning after the final ruling, that the money was the least important thing. Not because it wasn't substantial. It was. But because no amount of money could buy back the innocence I'd carried into that parking lot. The belief that if you do everything right, obey the law, build a life, contribute to your community, you're somehow protected. That following the rules makes you safe. I know now that's never been true, not for people who look like me, not in this country, not yet. But here's what else I know. Petrosky resigned 3 months after the verdict. Internal Affairs reopened investigations into 6 of his previous stops. 2 other officers in the department were required to undergo additional training. The city implemented new body camera policies requiring continuous recording during all citizen encounters. Small changes, incremental, maybe not enough. But Denise Crawford called me the week after the ruling. She'd seen the news coverage. She wanted to thank me, not for winning, though she was glad I'd won, but for saying out loud what she'd been carrying silently for years. "You made it real," she said. "I kept thinking maybe I imagined it. Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I was the problem, but you made it real." I think about that sometimes. About all the people who go through what I went through and never file a complaint. Never hire a lawyer. Never tell anyone because they're convinced no one will believe them. Maybe they're right. Maybe no one would have believed me either without that body camera footage, without Patricia's relentless digging, without a judge who cared about the truth and a jury that listened. I got lucky. That's the word people use, lucky. But luck shouldn't determine justice. Luck shouldn't be the difference between a lie that lasts forever and a truth that finally gets told. 2 years after the trial, I drove past that Walgreens for the first time since it happened. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. I just wanted to see it, to prove to myself that the parking lot was just a parking lot, that the asphalt was just asphalt, that the place where I'd lost something important wasn't anything special at all. Carol was with me. She reached over and squeezed my hand as we drove past. "You okay?" I watched the Walgreens shrink in my rearview mirror. The same strip mall, the same Panera across the street, the same sunset painting everything orange and gold. "I don't know," I said. "Ask me again in 20 years." She laughed. It was a small laugh, tired around the edges but real. "You planning to be around in 20 years?" "I'm planning to be around forever. Somebody's got to keep filing complaints." We drove home. The long way past the house where we'd raised our sons, past the park where I'd coached Little League, past the building I'd constructed with my own hands 23 years ago. Still standing, still solid, still exactly where I'd put it. I think about Marcus Ellison, 1L, the way Petrosky wrote it. The Marcus Ellison from the police report. The one who was erratic and combative and appeared to be casing vehicles. That Marcus Ellison doesn't exist. He never did. He was invented in the back of a patrol car by a man who needed the world to match the story he'd already decided to tell. But his name is still in the system somewhere, in the original report, in the 911 database, in whatever records they keep of encounters that never should have happened. And I wonder sometimes how many other ghosts are in those files. How many invented criminals? How many fabricated threats? How many Marcus Ellisons with the wrong number of letters, existing only as justification for fear that was never warranted? I couldn't save them. I couldn't even save myself, really. The version of me that existed before September 14th is gone, as surely as if he died in that parking lot. But I could tell the truth. I could stand in a courtroom and say what happened. I could let the jury decide who was lying. And that, maybe, is what justice looks like in a broken system. Not perfection, not healing, not the satisfying conclusion where everything returns to the way it was. Just the truth, spoken out loud, in a room where it might actually matter. The judge spelled my name right in the final ruling. Both L's, I checked. It's a small thing. But when a man's entire future hinges on the accuracy of a document, every letter matters.